1972 and the 2020, how these two are interlinked together. I feel almost as like 1972 there was like some kind of birth, and 2020 there is some kind of like death that surrounds 2020. These 2 years are really linked together.
I am broadcasting on all AM frequencies. I will be at the South Street Seaport every day at midday, when the sun is highest in the sky. If you are out there, if anyone is out there, I can provide food, I can provide shelter, I can provide security. If there's anybody out there, anybody, please, you are not alone.
Even like, okay, so like the coronavirus that's going on in 2020, right? That is changing everything in the world. We know 5G is being rolled out, and we know that with 2020, they're talking about removing cash because of the coronavirus. So they're saying that the coronavirus can stay on bills.
Paper money. When you start to think about it, there are many, many hands and places that cash comes in contact with on a daily basis. And yes, the experts tell us what some might expect. Diseases and viruses such as COVID-19 can be transmittable through phone lines, surfaces that have been handled by an infected person.
There are places that you can go in the U.S., businesses that literally will not take cash. There are places like Dairy Queen and other places that just, you pull up there and it says credit card only. They're taking no cash. It's very easy for the world system to be under one internet, which would be the 5G, for it to be a one world currency.
Somewhere in the near future, physical money will become like these, relics of a different age, and will only be found in places like this. In other words, hard cash will disappear. It will become electronic, transferred by things like these. So what's the rush to get rid of cash? And what's the cost?
Now, how does that link, one world currency, link with the 1972? Well, 1972, the one world currency was the US dollar. Like it or not, that was their one world currency because of the fact that in 1971, they changed the US dollar to no longer be backed by gold. It became a legal tender. So in 1972 was the first year that there was prints of US dollars that you could only find legal tender. A few years later after that, it became the petrodollar, which means that everywhere in the world you cannot buy oil, and we know the entire world is ran off of oil. You cannot buy oil anywhere in the world with rubles, with pesos, whatever. With the yen, it doesn't matter what currency you have in your country, you cannot buy oil. To oil your country, to get gas, to run your machines, or to heat or anything, unless you use US dollar. And that was only possible by the 1971 Act, and that all started in 1972. That's when you could still find currency. I talked about this before. You could still find currency that was from 1971 that was still backed by gold. So it truly did not start until 1972. There was no such dollars that were backed by gold. Legal tender only.
A revenue that is denominated in US dollars, not the currency of the countries where the oil comes from. All those nations that export their oil must sell it in dollars. So if the dollar loses value, so does their oil. But countries also peg their real currency to the dollar. That means fixing their currency with the dollar. So if the dollar fluctuates, so does their currency. If the dollar value lowers, so do the goods and services of that country. This ensures those countries don't experience wild swings in inflation or deflation. The petrodollar system elevated the US dollar to the world's reserve currency, and through this status, The United States enjoys persistent trade deficits and is a global economic hedge money. We all know that in the world, the most in-demand resource is oil. It makes oil-rich countries very wealthy, and it's priced in dollars that makes the USA's currency the most dominant currency in the world.
What does that mean with the coronavirus and the 5G rollout and the one world currency? Well, they could do a one world currency and get rid of all cash in the whole world and make a one world currency where everybody goes off of a Bitcoin type scenario. That would make it so much easier for the entire world. If the whole world went off of one currency and it was an internet currency, there would be no way to fluctuate, there would be no way to manipulate. It would all be on one digital currency and make it so much easier for the entire world to run off of one currency. That's pretty much also tells you that we have a one world government if that goes down. But that's a very big possibility that it can happen. What are some of the other things that are linked with 1972 and 2020? Well, here you go. Coronavirus again. You remember the song Lean On Me?
Legendary R&B singer and songwriter Bill Withers has died.
Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on.
Oh my, I think it was in 5th grade when I first sang this song with my classmates here. The 3-time Grammy winner is known for his soulful hits, including Lean On Me. Withers stopped making music back in the 80s, and during the coronavirus pandemic, his music had become an inspiration for so many. Healthcare workers and choirs and artists and more have been posting their own renditions of Lean On Me to help get through this difficult time.
That song came out in 1972. And that man who made that song in 1972 died in 2020 during the coronavirus, the time when you're told to stay 6 feet away from people. By the way, 6 feet is what? 72 inches.
We want to take a closer look at this important issue of social distancing, the practice implemented by public health officials to keep contagious diseases like coronavirus from spreading. Experts recommend people try to stay at least 6 feet away from each other. Here's a look at exactly how far 6 feet is. Well, this, of course, is aimed at trying to cut down the virus's spread, but you may be wondering why 6 feet. The reason is a little gross, but it's important. Experts believe the virus is mainly spread through droplets that come out of your mouth or nose. When an infected person speaks, exhales, coughs, or sneezes, the droplets travel about 3 to 6 feet before gravity pulls them to the ground. So, stay 6 feet away from someone and you stop the spread. It's also important to try to block coughs or sneezes with a tissue or your sleeve so as not to send those droplets flying directly towards someone nearby. And what about social gatherings? CDC now recommends you avoid social gatherings of more than 10 people. That could mean cancellations of weddings, family reunions, birthday parties, even funerals. Adults who are not sick or considered to be at risk can still date, but think about an intimate dinner at home instead of going somewhere with a lot of people. For kids, one leading expert says play dates are okay, especially if they're outside in parks and involve a small number of kids. But another expert says play dates are not recommended because kids generally have more mild COVID-19 illnesses and therefore might spread the disease before anyone realizes they're sick. It is going to be difficult to determine just how much these social distancing practices are helping. That's because testing for the virus was delayed, so we'll just have to wait and see. But one thing we do know, anything that can be done to help stop the spread of coronavirus is worth it.
So when they're telling you to take 6 feet away from people, don't be near anybody, well, that's just very bizarre that the song, the most famous song of touching and being close to somebody when you really need somebody there is Lean On Me. And people who are dying from the coronavirus, we hear time and time and again, these doctors and these nurses saying that they're watching these people die alone from the coronavirus. The irony of 1972 Lean On Me song and that man dying in 2020 during the coronavirus, these years are linked. They are interlinked. One is of a birth of a bunch of things that created your reality that you know, and now we are looking at the 2020, which is pretty much changing everything, and a lot of it has to do with, just death and blackness. Speaking of death, we had another death, Don Shulo. This has nothing to do with the world. It only has to do with the interlinked of the 2020 and the 1972, but it doesn't have to do with the entire world because the entire world doesn't care about American football. Regardless of what your biased views are, you can go to many, many countries and they're going to say, what the hell is American football? We don't even care. But here in America, 2020 and 1972 are linked through this man's death, because the only time in history that a football team has gone undefeated and win the Super Bowl was in 1972, the Miami Dolphins, and their head coach was Don Shula, and that's the most thing that he was known for, was that run in 1972 and coaching the U.S. Dolphins.
Miami Dolphins legend and former head coach Don Shula has passed away this morning. Shula has the most wins of any coach in NFL history, and of course famously led the Dolphins to the only perfect season in NFL history back in 1972.
1972, there was like some kind of birth, and 2020, there is some kind of like death.
How confident are you that we're actually going to have football this season?
Not very. And football was the sport that looked most likely to be played simply because of the distance in time between when we first started socially distancing and when the season would start.
So yes, 1972 and 2020 once again are linked between these things. Now, I have some predictions, and my predictions aren't always correct, but I've never had predictions about the 2020 and 1972 other than the fact of the currency, if that changes. So, and this one hits close to home for me because anytime I see something that has to do with JFK's murder, that really, I don't know why. That happened before I was born, but for some reason, whenever I see anything about JFK's murder, it really bothers me, and it has my entire life. It has always been really, it's almost like I was there, but I know I wasn't there because I wasn't born that time. Well, at least not in this matrix. When he died and he was assassinated, it let Lyndon Johnson, become president. Well, Lyndon Johnson had to name a successor in his place as a vice president, and the vice president that he took was Hubert Humphrey. Hubert Humphrey tried, and Hubert Humphrey was linked to 1972. Hubert Humphrey tried to run for president in 1972 when Richard Nixon was running for president, and he was running for the Democratic nominee. Hubert Humphrey, something happened, and he was winning some states, and something had happened with Hubert Humphrey. I don't know the whole story. You guys have to do research on your own. But Hubert Humphrey those states were taken away from him to put the next person in place to run against Richard Nixon. For some reason, the people thought that even though because he won those states, something happened and they did not want that man to run. So now keep in mind, he was the Democratic vice president before Richard Nixon. So the presidency before Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey was the vice president. And he was a vice president under Lyndon Johnson, who took the place of John F. Kennedy after his assassination.
I have just signed, as you know, a certificate declaring my candidacy for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. I came within a hair's breadth of beating Mr. Nixon in 1968 before they found out really what he was like in public office. I think now that the people that find out that you've got rising prices, high cost of living, high unemployment, high interest rates, unfavorable balance of trade, devalued dollar, a country that's standing still, and a president that doesn't seem to have any contact with the young or the blacks or the farmers of this country or the workers, I think Mr. Nixon is the most beatable candidate that I could find. I knew that we were going to win in Pennsylvania. I told you that. Yes. And I knew that we could win in West Virginia. I felt that Indiana was almost a nip and tuck outfit battle. Here, when I came in, candor is what you want. I felt that we did not have momentum. And when you don't have momentum in politics, you can get in trouble. You've got to have momentum. I had to stop the McGovern momentum here, and I did, by the attack, by opening up in the debates and the attack and laying it on the line to show the difference between Senator McGovern and Hubert Humphrey. In other words, there is a difference, and I'm asking the people to know the difference, to vote the difference. And I really believe that we've turned it around now where the opposition is having to say, what's Humphrey going to do next?
The poll showed coming in here that you were leading by, well, it's in the margin of error, perhaps 3, 4, 5 percentage points. You did not believe that, I understand.
No, I'm a very pessimistic fellow about polls. The poll that I feel, I've told you, I kind of feel it in my hands. And again, the most important thing in politics is momentum. If you lose it, it's hard to get a hold of it. If you got it, it rolls just like a big wheel or a big rock going downhill. And
Voters in 3 states in the District of Columbia marked ballots today in the biggest primary day of Campaign 72. The voting in the Capitol and in Alabama involved convention delegates unpledged to any candidate, although in some instances favoring one or the other. So the interest centered on Indiana and Ohio. Ohio has evolved essentially into a race between Hubert Humphrey and George McGovern. The count will be slowed there by a voting machine problem in the Cleveland area, which has resulted in a federal court order keeping polls open until midnight. That Cuyahoga County area accounts for some 20% or more of the Ohio vote. In Indiana, Edmund Muskie's name remained on the ballot, but the race was between Humphrey and George Wallace.
McGovern went on to win the nomination, of course. The party threw out all its longtime leaders, and Nixon won re-election in a landslide.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Only to resign in disgrace less than 2 years later because of the Watergate scandal. Our Face the Nation flashback.
How is that linked to 2020? This is just a prediction. And if this happens, then there you have it. There's another way we can start seeing patterns in what's going on with 1972 and 2020. We right now have a Democratic nominee, ex-vice president, just like they did in 1972, who is going to be running against the sitting Republican president. Just like Richard Nixon was the sitting Republican president, and there was a Democratic vice president that was about to run against him. This scenario is about to play out exactly the same way in 1972. Joe Biden is going to be running against Donald Trump, correct? He is the vice president under Obama. Now, there are things that are happening that the vice president Joe Biden, the Democratic vice president Joe Biden, may possibly be removed from that nominee and be replaced with a different Democrat, which most likely is going to be Bernie Sanders. So if this is overturned and Joe Biden is removed from the Democratic nominee because of all the scandals and all the accusations that are going on, and it becomes too much, because I'm listening to Democrats on C-SPAN and stuff that are split 50-50 on this man should not be running for president because of all these things, and it may be a movement that actually removes him from the possibility of running against Donald Trump. It can be done because it happened to Hubert Humphrey in 1972. In 1972, a former vice president ran against a sitting Republican president, and he was removed and somebody else was put in place, and now this looks like it's going to happen all over again. So there you go, guys, and then we'll be bringing up some more stuff. Maybe if I'm still around, I will be bringing up more things. We're going to see how this year plays out. Who knows? I might not make it to the end of the year. If I do, I will still be bringing you videos that will show the interlinking of 1972 and 2020. And if this prediction comes true, I think people need to start taking this stuff even a lot more serious. Well, I mean, the fact is a lot of you are just a bunch of NPCs, and that's just what it is. And you won't be able to see the connected dots. You just can't do it. And probably even if this becomes pure evidence of a prediction, a lot of people are just going to dismiss it regardless, because you just can't see. So for those of you who can see, and those of you who can hear the message, keep digging and keep looking into 1972, because I think you'll start to understand the truth of really what we're all dealing with here, as far as being in a matrix and seeing how this thing works.
Senator George McGovern, a proud liberal from South Dakota, announced his presidential campaign on January 18, 1971.
I have decided to seek the presidency of the United States.
17 months later, he secured the Democratic nomination with Thomas Eagleton as his vice president.
And I nominate Senator George McGovern for the presidency of the United States.
His campaign and the political conditions of the time have some striking similarities to what we're seeing today. It was a time of political upheaval, and Nixon's popularity was poor outside the Republican Party, much like President Trump's has been.
You hear them? You hear them night after night on your television. People shouting their obscenities about America and what we stand for.
That the Democrats are crooked. They've got a lot of crooked things going.
Humphrey admitted that he couldn't win over young anti-war voters. And his loss in 1968, like Clinton's in 2016, laid the groundwork for candidates with more liberal views in the next election. In 1972, that candidate was George McGovern. Today, it's Bernie Sanders, and they're all parallels in their policies. McGovern launched his campaign vowing to withdraw every American soldier from Southeast Asia if he became president.
Any senator who talks about sending American forces into Cambodia ought to lead the charge himself. I'm fed up to the ears with old men dreaming up wars for young men to die in.
And here's Sanders in 2020.
These wars have cost us so much in blood and in treasure.
Both McGovern and Sanders had high-profile endorsements from minorities, especially the black community.
I believe that Senator McGovern will bring an end to the era of division in our nation and will usher in a new era of reconciliation.
I can honestly say that your integrity propels and compels me to keep supporting you.
And McGovern even made legalization of marijuana part of his platform.
In politics, Senator George McGovern said in Boston today that the prohibition of alcohol, tried in the 1920s, was a failure, and that perhaps the sensible thing to do sometime in the future about marijuana is not to prohibit its use, but to control it, the way we control alcoholic beverages.
And so has Sanders.
But one thing you can do with an executive order, and I will do it on my first day in the White House, is make marijuana legal in every state.
In the 70s, a rising percentage of Americans felt that the rich were getting richer and poor getting poorer.
But an election year is the people's year to speak. And this year, the people are going to ensure that the tax system is changed so that work is rewarded and so that those who derive the highest benefits will pay their fair share rather than slipping through the loopholes at the expense of the rest of us.
It is the reality that the people on top, with their wealth and power and access to lawyers and accountants and lobbyists, are able to manipulate the system to their own benefits. That's what the rigged economy is all about.
But despite the momentum that led McGovern to the nomination, he was annihilated in the 1972 general election against Richard Nixon.
Quick update after doing a bunch more research on 1972 Democratic nominee for presidency. Hubert Humphrey was not removed. What happened was that there was a whole new process that they put in place that they never done before for the Democratic nominee, and that led to McGovern slipping in there and taking the spot of Hubert Humphrey, the ex-vice president, who had a really good chances of beating Nixon before, so it doesn't seem to add up why they would switch. But yeah, so that's pretty much what's going on. Hubert Humphrey, probably most likely, if he would have ran against Nixon, he would have won. If Joe Biden runs against Donald Trump, there's a possibility he can win. But if Biden is removed in for some kind of crazy way, and Bernie Sanders, who is a lot like McGovern, ends up taking that place of Joe Biden and he runs against Donald Trump, then the numbers say that Bernie Sanders will lose in a landslide if we're repeating everything from 1972. So there you have it, and that's my prediction.
Lean on